The smell hit her first. Warm, creamy, strange. It drifted through the mess hall like a ghost of something half-remembered from another life. For a second, Dorothea Blues thought it was her imagination again. The kind of trick hunger plays when your stomach is empty for too long. But then she saw it. Steam rising from a metal pot. The glint of golden crumbs. And the cook, an American woman with dark skin and tired eyes, smiling as she ladled the pale mixture onto tin trays. "Next," the woman said, voice slow and soft. "That's tuna casserole." The words meant nothing to Dorothea. Tuna what? She'd learned enough English to follow orders, not menus. Still, the smell wrapped around her like a memory of kitchens and safety in the years before everything burned. Behind her, the line shuffled forward, the sound of boots on concrete echoing under the high tin roof. The mess hall was too clean. That was the first thing everyone noticed. The floors were swept, the windows unbroken, the tables wiped after every meal. It didn't feel like a prison. It felt like a lie. Dorothea stepped closer to the counter. Her stomach clenched, not from hunger this time, but confusion. She looked down into the pot. Real noodles, thick, soft egg noodles tangled with bits of meat and flecks of green. A creamy sauce that glistened under the lights. And on top, a layer of something golden and crisp. Crushed potatoes, maybe? She hadn't seen anything like it since 1942. The American cook, Mrs. Tate, her name tag said, smiled at her like she wasn't the enemy. "Big scoop for you," she said, and plopped a steaming portion onto the tray. Dorothea mumbled something like "Danke," though she knew the woman wouldn't understand. She turned, walked toward the tables, and sat near the back, her tray trembling in her hands. Around her, 40 other women did the same, eyes darting from plate to plate, from guards to cooks, like waiting for someone to shout that it was a mistake. Liesel, the woman beside her, leaned close and whispered in German. "They're testing us." "Testing what?" Dorothea murmured. "Our discipline." "Maybe it's poisoned." Dorothea stared at the casserole. It didn't look like poison. It looked like temptation. She could smell the milk, the salt, the faint sweetness of real butter. Her throat ached. She hadn't seen butter in years. Someone at the next table took a bite. Everyone froze, watching. The woman chewed once, twice, and didn't fall dead. Then another followed. And another. Dorothea lifted her fork. Her hand shook. The metal was heavy in her fingers. She took a small piece, barely enough to taste, and placed it on her tongue. It was warm, creamy, salty, real. For a heartbeat, her body forgot to breathe. Then her stomach twisted violently, rejecting the shock of richness. She gagged, hand flying to her mouth, the fork clattering against the tray. 40 heads turned. The mess hall went silent. She tried to swallow the panic, but the tears came first. Uncontrollable, humiliating, hot against her cheeks. She pressed her napkin to her face, shaking, sobbing, trying to hold in the sound. The cook stopped serving. The American guard nearest the door stepped forward, uncertain. "Ma'am, food bad?" Dorothea couldn't answer. She wasn't crying because it was bad. She was crying because it was good. Too good, impossibly good. The taste of it ripped through everything she'd built to survive. The discipline, the bitterness, the certainty that the enemy was cruel. Liesel grabbed her wrist, whispering, "Dora, stop. They're watching." But she couldn't. The tears kept coming, loud now, spilling onto the table. Mrs. Tate came around the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "Honey, what's wrong?" "You sick? You allergic to fish?" Liesel stood, trembling, her English fractured. "She thinks, mistake, wrong food." "Not for prisoners," the American blinked. "Not for prisoners." She looked from Liesel to Dorothea, then back again. Finally, she shook her head and smiled gently. "Oh, baby, it's just lunch. Tuesday lunch. You ain't special. Tuesday lunch." Dorothea stared up at her, unable to process the words. Back home, a meal like this would have been a celebration, a miracle, something you'd trade a week's rations for. And this woman said it like it was nothing. Mrs. Tate patted her shoulder awkwardly. "You want stew instead? Or some bread?" "Got both." Dorothea tried to speak, but the words dissolved into another sob. Mrs. Tate gave a small sigh, stood, and went back to the counter, shaking her head. Poor girls. Don't know what to do with good food. The noise in the hall slowly returned, spoons scraping, trays clinking. Some women ate cautiously, others quickly, afraid the Americans might change their minds. Dorothea sat still for a long time, watching steam curl off her plate. She took another bite, smaller this time. The sauce coated her tongue. The salt stung her throat, but she kept chewing. Across the room, a guard laughed at something another said. The sound was light, easy. It didn't belong in a prison camp. It didn't belong in her world at all. For 3 years, she'd eaten like an animal. Thin soup, black bread, whatever they could scavenge during the collapse. Her body had grown used to emptiness. Hunger had been her only constant companion, and now this. Creamed tuna, noodles, potato chips. A recipe made from cans and comfort. Something invented by people who had never known starvation. She thought about her mother, who'd died during the bombings in Hamburg. About the propaganda posters showing Americans as devils in suits, feasting while Europe burned. About the lessons drilled into her since childhood. That mercy was weakness, that the enemy was inhuman. But there was nothing inhuman about the woman who'd called her sweetheart. Nothing monstrous about food that made her weep. When the meal ended, Dorothea looked down at her empty tray, then up at the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She felt heavier, not from the food but from the weight of realizing everything she'd believed might be wrong. She rose quietly, carried her tray to the return counter. Mrs. Tate took it with a nod and said, "See you tomorrow, sugar." Tomorrow. Another meal. Another mistake that wasn't a mistake at all. Outside, the Mississippi air was thick and damp. Sunlight bounced off barbed wire and watchtowers, but it didn't look menacing anymore. It just looked ordinary. Dorothea stopped, the taste of tuna still on her tongue. And for the first time since the war began, she didn't feel like a prisoner. She felt like someone learning how to be human again. The mess hall had gone quiet hours ago, yet Dorothea still heard the sound of the ladle hitting her tray. That dull metallic clink echoed in her head as if it had struck something deeper than tin. Around her, the air had smelled of grease and salt and something achingly human. Comfort. She lay in her bunk, eyes open, the taste of the casserole still ghosting on her tongue. Butter, salt, cream, a richness that felt almost violent. For years, food had been survival. Now it felt like revelation. She pressed her hands against her chest as if trying to hold something in that might spill out. Something like shame, or maybe awakening. Morning came gray and wet. Outside, a truck rumbled across the yard, carrying sacks of flour and crates of Coca-Cola bottles clinking in their wooden frames. Liesel watched from the barracks window, eyes narrowed. Her breath fogged the glass, and for a moment she thought it looked like smoke rising from Hamburg again. She turned away, but when the midday work detail ended, one of the American guards waved them over and handed each woman a sweating bottle. Cold, actually cold. Liesel's fingers stung from the chill. The glass hissed faintly as condensation slid down its side. For an instant she was certain it was a trick. She remembered the pamphlets, the ones that said Americans drank sugar water while Europe starved. She'd believed every word. But the guard just grinned and walked off whistling. She twisted the cap. The hiss was alive, urgent. Bubbles leapt like tiny explosions. Her first sip nearly burned. The shock of cold and sweetness hit her so hard she almost laughed. It was absurd, delicious, forbidden, ridiculous. Real sugar, not beet extract. Real cold. The kind that meant someone had used electricity for pleasure, not necessity. She drained the bottle in under a minute and stood gasping, dizzy from sugar and confusion. Around her, the others stared at their bottles like relics from another world. That night, Liesel couldn't sleep. The barracks were dark except for the faint spill of light through the window. Outside, the camp fence gleamed under floodlights. Beyond it, another set of lights burned brighter, whiter. Men's voices drifted through the air, carried on laughter and a crack of something that sounded like wood striking leather. Curious, she slipped from her bunk and crossed to the fence. And there, beyond the barbed wire, was an entire field lit like day. Baseball. Men in white uniforms running, shouting, laughing beneath a constellation of man-made stars. She gripped the wire until it bit her palms. Floodlights, the same kind of lights that once turned Hamburg into a furnace. She remembered the flares the RAF had dropped, hanging in the sky before the bombs came, bleaching the night into horror. Now those same lights illuminated men playing games. The irony twisted in her chest. Behind her, footsteps crunched on gravel. Hilda, the nurse, joined her, eyes half closed, squinting at the bright field beyond. "I can barely see it," she murmured. "I see everything," Liesel said quietly. And she meant it. They stood there, two German women framed by wire and light. watching men who had once been their enemies throw and catch and laugh like nothing had ever burned. The world was upside down. How could cruelty and kindness wear the same uniform? How could abundance feel so gentle and so merciless at once? Liesl turned the empty bottle in her hands, the faint residue at the bottom glowing amber under the lights. She whispered to herself, "They give us the lights we feared for games." Hilda said nothing. Her eyes reflected the floodlights, distant and watery. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a breath. "They live like this every day?" Liesl nodded. "No one could have beaten them," she said. "Not because of guns, but because of this." She gestured toward the laughter, the light, the impossible normalcy of it all. "Because they can afford joy." Back in the barracks, Dorothea lay awake, listening to the faint hum of generators. Somewhere outside, an American cook was probably washing dishes, singing under her breath. Maybe Mrs. Tate was humming one of those gospel tunes that rose and fell like waves on a shore. Dorothea closed her eyes and saw her face again. Warm, tired, kind. Not the face of an enemy. Just a woman who worried about whether prisoners liked her cooking. It was a thought so absurd it nearly made her laugh. Instead, tears came again, quieter this time. Not from hunger, but from the realization that she didn't know what enemy even meant anymore. She had been raised to believe that strength came from hardness, from starving with pride, from enduring without kindness. But the American strength came from something else entirely. From excess, from casual mercy, from the belief that even their prisoners deserved casserole on a Tuesday. That thought scared her more than bombs ever had. Because if kindness was strength, then everything she'd been taught was a lie. Outside, the floodlights flickered once, then went dark. The laughter faded. The night reclaimed its silence. Dorothea rolled onto her side, pulling the thin blanket to her chin. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about survival. She was thinking about flavor, about light, about a world that could afford to waste sugar and mercy in equal measure. And somewhere deep in her chest, something cracked open. A quiet, painful seed of wonder. The mess hall smelled of grease, soap, and something that shouldn't have existed in a prison camp. Warmth. Dorothea carried her tray with both hands as if it were fragile glass. Around her, the clang of spoons, the shuffle of boots, the hum of conversation, all blurred into a low murmur. On her plate sat the thing that unsettled her most. Tuna casserole. Creamy, steaming golden crumbs on top catching the light. For a woman who had survived on watery soup and black bread, it looked like a dream. For a prisoner, it looked like a mistake. She sat at the far end of the long wooden table, trying to breathe evenly, pretending to belong in this strange new rhythm of normal life. Liesl sat opposite her, picking at her food, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What is this?" she muttered. "Tuna," Dorothea whispered, her voice barely audible. Liesl frowned as if the word itself were an insult. Around them, the women of Camp Clinton ate in hesitant silence, each one holding a fork like a weapon against confusion. The air carried the faint scent of milk, butter, and something impossible: generosity. Dorothea lifted her fork, the noodles trembling. One bite, she told herself, just one. The first taste hit her like a detonation. Cream, salt, warmth, fat, the taste of abundance. Her body didn't know what to do with it. Her stomach twisted. Her throat closed. Then came the sob, loud, raw, unstoppable. The fork clattered to the tray. 40 women froze mid-bite. The sound of a single cry shattered the steady hum of lunch, echoing off the metal walls like a confession. Tears spilled faster than she could wipe them away. Mrs. Geneva Tate, the camp cook, paused behind the serving line, ladle in hand. Her brow furrowed, not in anger but in concern. "Baby, what's wrong? You allergic to something?" she asked softly. The young MP nearby shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to intervene. Dorothea couldn't answer. She wasn't choking on food. She was choking on realization. The enemy had fed her something her own country never could. She'd been prepared for cruelty, for vengeance, for humiliation, but not this. Not kindness baked in cream and potato chips. Mrs. Tate wiped her palms on her apron, walked around the counter, and crouched beside the crying woman. "You don't like tuna? I got stew in the back, honey. Maybe you want that instead?" The offer only made it worse. Dorothea's tears deepened. Liesl reached across the table, her hand trembling as she touched her friend's wrist. "Breathe," she whispered in German. "They're watching." But Dorothea couldn't stop. Every bite of her life before this moment, the sawdust bread, the ration lines, the propaganda sermons, crumbled beneath the weight of one ordinary American lunch. The cook looked confused, glancing between them. "She's fine," Lysol said haltingly in broken English. "Just surprise." Mrs. Tate blinked, then gave a small, bewildered laugh. "Surprise? Over tuna casserole?" She shook her head, muttering, "Lord, these poor babies." Around the room, the other prisoners watched, forks frozen in midair. One woman chewed slowly as if tasting guilt. Another scraped her plate clean, then stared at it in disbelief. Butter, milk, tuna. All so simple, so common here. Each one a luxury back home. Dorothea finally found her voice, soft and hoarse. She looked at Lysol and whispered, "Tell her." "I thought it was mistake," Lysol translated. Mrs. Tate's face softened. She pulled out a chair and sat right beside the prisoners, ignoring the MP's startled look. "Sweetheart," she said slowly, "this ain't no mistake. It's Tuesday lunch. You get what our boys get. That's the rule." She smiled faintly as if the truth were obvious. "We all eat the same here." The words hung in the air, heavy as iron. Tuesday lunch. Regular food. Equality written in butter and canned soup. Dorothea stared at the casserole cooling on her tray, steam fading into the stale camp air. For the first time she realized she wasn't just being fed, she was being confronted. Every spoonful was a question she couldn't answer. What if the enemy's mercy wasn't weakness? What if kindness could win wars better than bombs? She took another bite, slow this time. The taste still overwhelmed her, but she didn't gag. The tears still came, but quieter now, steady as breathing. Around her, the mess hall began to stir again. The sound of forks returned, muted conversation picking up, but something invisible had shifted. Each woman at that table ate differently now, hesitant, reverent, aware. Dorothea swallowed hard and whispered to herself, "It's not poison." For the first time in years, she believed it. The November sun was sharp that morning, bright enough to turn the gravel yard silver. Lysol stood in line with 6 other women, sleeves rolled to their elbows, hands raw from washing uniforms in cold water. When the American guard passed by, he tossed something small and glassy toward her. She caught it clumsily. It was a bottle, brown, sweating with condensation, the label printed in English letters she barely understood. Coca-Cola. He grinned, said something she didn't catch, and moved on, whistling. The bottle hissed faintly in her grip, alive with tiny bubbles racing toward the surface. She stared at it like it was a live grenade. Her mind reached for the propaganda posters, the ones back home showing fat Americans drinking poison, rotting their teeth with sugar water while Europe fought for survival. She'd believed them. Everyone had, but this was cold. The glass stung her fingers. She pressed it to her cheek and flinched from the chill. No one had felt that kind of cold in years. Refrigeration was a luxury of victory, not survival. "It's poison," whispered Greta beside her. "Capitalist poison." Lysol almost agreed, almost dropped it, then curiosity won. She twisted the cap. The hiss was sharp, metallic, startling. Gas escaped like breath from a living creature. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Lysol raised the bottle to her lips and drank. The first swallow hit like electricity. Sweet, cold, fizzing, an explosion of flavor and temperature so intense it made her gasp. Her teeth ached from the chill. Her throat burned. Her eyes watered, but she couldn't stop. The second gulp came faster than the third until the bottle was empty. She lowered it slowly, breathless. Her heart raced as though she'd run miles. Around her, the others stared in disbelief. The guard turned back, laughing softly. "You want another?" "5 cents, he said, tapping his pocket. 5 cents. Lysol repeated the phrase silently. A miracle, cold, sugar, glass comfort, was worth less than bread. Greta took a cautious sip from her own bottle, then another. Hilda, the nurse, frowned at the fizzing surface before surrendering to curiosity. Within minutes, all 7 women stood drinking beneath the Mississippi sun, their faces lit with something dangerously close to joy. When one of them burped, the group erupted into laughter so genuine it startled the nearby guard. It was the first time they'd laughed since the war ended. That night, Lysol couldn't sleep. The sweetness still lingered on her tongue. She rolled the empty bottle between her palms, listening to the distant hum of generators beyond the wire. Outside, Floodlights blazed over the American base, white and perfect, cutting through the darkness. She slipped from her bunk, curiosity pulling her toward the fence. The air was cool, the grass wet beneath her feet. And there, beyond the perimeter, she saw them. American soldiers on a baseball field, playing under lights brighter than the moon. The crack of the bat echoed through the night. Laughter carried across the empty space like music. Hilda joined her, silent at first, her breath misting in the cold air. "What are they doing?" she asked, squinting through her broken glasses. "Playing," Liesl answered. The word felt strange on her tongue. A game. At midnight. Hilda's brow furrowed. Floodlights. She remembered them too, over Hamburg, when the bombers came. Those same lights had turned the city into a furnace, revealing everything for destruction. Now they revealed men laughing. The contrast made her dizzy. How can they use that light for games? She whispered. Liesl said nothing. She just kept watching, fingers curling around the fence wire until her knuckles turned white. The scene before them was unreal. Men running, shouting, cheering. The sound of a radio playing jazz fast and wild, drifting through the night. It was a civilization that could waste electricity on joy. Liesl felt a tightness in her chest, something like awe or envy. "They have enough for this," she murmured. "Enough sugar, enough power, enough light to play while the rest of the world starves." Hilda nodded faintly, her eyes distant. "Maybe that's why they won," she said. "Because they can afford to be kind." The thought lingered between them, soft but devastating. The floodlights stayed on long after the game ended. The players laughed, packed their gear, and walked off into the brightness. Then one by one the lights clicked off, plunging the field into darkness. Liesl stood there long after, the empty Coca-Cola bottle clutched to her chest. It was still sticky with sugar, glowing faintly in the moonlight. She turned it slowly, watching the last drop catch the reflection of the distant lamps. "They give us the lights we feared," she whispered, "for children's games." Hilda said nothing. She only placed a hand on Liesl's shoulder and left it there, steady and warm. Back in her bunk, Liesl tucked the bottle under her mattress beside her diary. Sleep didn't come easily. Every sound in the night, crickets, footsteps, generators, felt like proof of something she didn't yet understand. The Americans had conquered more than cities. They'd conquered the idea of scarcity, and in doing so they'd dismantled everything she'd been taught about strength, power, and pride. As she closed her eyes, the fizz of Coca-Cola still echoed in her mind, bright, impossible, alive. By spring, the women had learned the rhythm of the camp, the bugle calls, the morning roll, the strange calm that followed every meal. But some things still felt impossible. Like the infirmary, the Americans called it the clinic, though it looked more like a small hospital. Bright white walls, real beds, clean sheets. Hilda, the nurse, couldn't stop staring the first time they brought her there. Her glasses, cracked since the firestorm in Hamburg, had been her only connection to the world. Now she could barely see her own hands. The camp doctor noticed immediately. "We'll fix that," he said simply. Hilda blinked behind her crooked frames. "Fix?" she echoed, unsure she'd heard right. The interpreter smiled. "He says he'll get you new glasses." It sounded absurd. She was a prisoner, not a patient. But the next day they drove her across the compound to a nearby town. The Americans let her sit in the front seat. Through the windshield she saw houses painted in bright colors, laundry fluttering on lines, children chasing a dog down a sunlit street. The doctor took her to an optometrist, an ordinary store with mirrors and posters of smiling people. She wanted to cry right there. The American optometrist spoke gently, moving the lenses in front of her eyes. "Better like this?" he asked each time. His voice was kind but matter-of-fact, as if it were the most natural thing in the world to help an enemy. She nodded, speechless. When he finally fitted her with the right pair, she turned to the window and gasped. The trees were no longer smudges of green, they had leaves. Real, distinct leaves shimmering in the light. She saw color again, shape, distance. The world returned in detail she'd forgotten existed. Her hands trembled as she touched the new glasses. Back at the camp, the other women gathered around her, laughing and clapping as if she'd been resurrected. Dorothea grinned. "You look 10 years younger," she said. Hilda shook her head, smiling through tears. "No," she whispered. "I just look alive." That night she sat on her bunk staring at the floodlights beyond the wire. For once, they didn't seem menacing. They just lit the sky. She thought about the doctor's calm voice, the warm hands of the optometrist, the way the world had looked when she'd stepped outside and truly seen it for the first time in years. Days later, she met Captain Oshiro, the Japanese-American officer who oversaw the camp's medical records. His family had been in internment during the war, yet he treated every woman with the same quiet respect. When Hilda hesitated to take her new medicine, he said softly, "My mother was a nurse too." The word struck her like a blow. She looked up, searching his face. There was no bitterness there, only tired understanding. "You hate us," she said in halting English. "We hurt your people." He shook his head. "Hate doesn't heal anyone," he replied. "I do what's right, not what's easy." That night, Hilda wrote his words in her diary, the letters shaky but deliberate. Hate doesn't heal anyone. It echoed through the barracks, carried in whispers. Some women mocked it. Others fell silent, but Dorothea believed it. Every act of kindness chipped away at the old world she'd carried inside her, a world built on hierarchy, obedience, pride. Each day in the camp felt less like punishment and more like re-education in what humanity truly meant. Even Liesel, the hardest among them, began to soften. She still scowled at the guards but started saving half her bread for a stray cat that lingered by the fence. The Americans noticed the change but said nothing. They didn't need to. Their victory was silent, patient, almost invisible. It lived in casseroles, in Coca-Cola bottles, in eyeglasses and baseball lights. One by one, the prisoners began to unlearn the darkness that had shaped them. They learned laughter again, then trust, then shame, and finally hope. They began to write letters home, not about hunger or hate, but about things like taste, color, and music. For the first time, their words sounded like they belonged to women, not soldiers. Hilda kept her glasses polished like relics, symbols of her second sight. On the last night of May, a storm rolled in over the camp. Thunder cracked, rain fell hard against the tin roofs, and lightning flashed across the sky. The women gathered at the windows, watching as the floodlights flickered. Hilda removed her glasses, wiped them clean, and whispered to Dorothea, "Do you see it?" "The rain looks real again." Dorothea smiled faintly. "It always was," she said. "We just forgot how to look." Outside, the rain blurred the lights into halos, washing the world in silver. Inside, the women stood silent, each finally seeing the war's end not as surrender but as sight restored. The Ford tractor gleamed under the Mississippi sun, its red paint catching the light like blood turned harmless. For Anya Brewer, who once assembled torpedo guidance systems in a German factory, it looked like a piece of alien machinery, loud, alive, and free. Wyatt Landrino, the American farmer assigned to train them, stood beside it with grease-stained hands and an easy grin. His drawl stretched each word into honey. "First rule," he said, tapping the clutch, "it ain't a tank." The German women exchanged glances. None of them understood the joke, but the warmth in his voice disarmed them. Anya climbed onto the tractor, metal seat still warm from the sun. Her hands trembled on the wheel. The machine smelled of oil dust and something sweet, maybe honeysuckle from the nearby field. Wyatt gave instructions slowly, patient as a teacher with children. "Ease the clutch out," he said. "Nice and steady," she obeyed. The engine shuddered, bucked, then stalled with a sharp cough. Behind her, the other women laughed, the first real laughter she'd heard since surrender. Wyatt didn't scold. He just smiled, nodding toward the ignition. "Try again, darling." No one learns on the first go. The second time, Anya found the rhythm. The tractor moved forward, wheels cutting deep grooves through the soil. The Mississippi air clung to her skin, thick and alive. Every turn of the wheel felt like defiance. Against war, against hunger, against everything that had reduced her to a number. Wyatt walked beside her, shouting encouragement. "That's it! Smooth and steady." For the first time, she wasn't building something to kill. She was building something that would grow. The earth responded beneath her feet, soft and forgiving. When she stopped, Wyatt clapped. "See? Told you it ain't that hard." At noon, Wyatt unpacked a meal his mother had cooked. Fried chicken, biscuits, sweet tea in mason jars. The food smelled like heaven. The German women sat in the shade, hesitant as if it might be another trick. But one bite erased their doubt. Real chicken, crisp and tender, seasoned instead of rationed. Anya took a sip of the tea and nearly choked. "It is so sweet," she said, blinking. Wyatt laughed. "Ain't tea if it ain't sweet." They ate in silence except for the radio playing from the barn, a man's voice stretching sorrow into song. Wyatt called it country music. The song was "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry." The steel guitar wept like a living thing. Anya didn't understand the words, but the sound hollowed her out. Loneliness was a language she spoke fluently. When the song ended, she asked Wyatt to play it again. He did, then again. The other women smiled faintly, shaking their heads. Something in that song, in the bending of its notes, cracked open a part of her she thought had died under factory noise and air raid sirens. She didn't know what it meant yet, only that it made her want to live. Weeks passed and the lessons continued. Wyatt taught her to reverse with a wagon attached, to check oil levels, to recognize the smell of overheating metal. He told stories about his childhood, about the rodeos before the war, about the polio that left his limp but didn't touch his pride. "Classified 4F, he said with a shrug. Didn't fight nobody. Anya stared at him, astonished. In her world, men who didn't fight were cowards. In his, they just lived. That difference, small and enormous at once, unsettled her. America's strength, she realized, wasn't cruelty. It was choice, the power to be gentle. One afternoon, rain pinned them inside the barn. Wyatt produced 2 small glass bowls from a basket. "Chocolate pudding," he said proudly. "Mama's recipe." Anya stared. Chocolate, real milk, real sugar. The spoon trembled in her hand as she took a bite. It was soft, rich, and absurdly kind. "You are feeding your enemy better than my country fed its soldiers," she murmured. Wyatt sat beside her on the tractor's hood. "You ain't my enemy," he said quietly. "You're just a person who lost." The simplicity of it stunned her. For the first time, losing didn't feel like annihilation. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was brief, hesitant, but enough. His lips tasted of sugar and dust and something impossible. Peace. He didn't pull away. His hand brushed her cheek like forgiveness. Outside, the rain softened. Inside, the world shifted. When she returned to the camp, the other women noticed the glow in her face but said nothing. The next Thursday, Wyatt handed her a record, the same Hank Williams song pressed in black vinyl. "For you," he said. "Something to remember." That night, she played it 17 times until even the guards started humming the melody. By May, she could drive the tractor blindfolded. Wyatt gave her his old rodeo belt buckle, tarnished silver engraved with a bronco. "Bring it back someday," he said. "Promise me that." She closed her fingers around it like a sacred relic. "I promise." When she hid it under her mattress that night, Dorothea saw and smiled knowingly. Love, even forbidden, had become a small act of rebellion, proof that the war was truly ending, not just on paper, but inside them. In the dark, Hank Williams's voice drifted through the barracks. "Hear that lonesome whippoorwill, he sounds too blue to fly." The assembly hall smelled of pine cleaner and fear. Rows of metal chairs filled with women who had once marched in perfect formation now sat motionless, uniforms faded to gray. Captain Lewis stood at the podium, voice echoing against the walls. "By order of the United States War Department," he read, "your repatriation to occupied Germany has been approved." The words landed like a verdict. Some women stared at the floor. Others clutched letters, their edges worn from too much folding. Freedom, they'd been told. But for many, the word had lost its shape somewhere between surrender and survival. Dorothea sat in the third row, the paper trembling in her lap. She'd rewritten it 4 times, checking each English word in the contraband dictionary Liesel had traded cigarettes for. Her handwriting looked foreign even to her. Around her, whispers rippled through the hall, talk of ships, of ports, of cities that no longer existed. The women had imagined this day for months. Now that it had come, it felt less like release and more like exile. Behind them, Mrs. Geneva Tate leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching the faces of women she'd been feeding since autumn. Captain Lewis continued reading, his voice practiced, detached. "Transports depart from New Orleans, August 2nd through 5th. You'll be issued clothing, rations, and documentation." His words blurred into noise. Dorothea wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at her hands, the same hands that once keyed out coordinates for U-boats, that had held a fork shaking over a plate of tuna casserole. Her throat tightened. She'd told herself she was ready to go back, ready to rebuild. But rebuild what? The Reich was rubble. Her mother's last letter said the street no longer existed. Even the church bells had melted for munitions. A chair scraped against linoleum. Dorothea didn't realize she was the one standing until every head turned. Captain Lewis paused mid-sentence, brows furrowed. "Miss Blusine, do you need assistance?" The silence stretched. Her heart hammered. Then, trembling, she spoke. "May I speak?" The captain hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." Dorothea's English was halting but clear. "I volunteer for Kriegsmarine. I'm 19. They tell us we fight animals. They say America is cruel. Then," her voice broke, "then Mrs. Tate gives me casserole. Creamed tuna potatoes. She says that's Tuesday lunch." A murmur passed through the room. Dorothea pressed on. "I think she make mistake," she continued, voice shaking. "I think this food is for American soldiers, not prisoners. Because my country never feeds soldiers so good, never." She wiped her eyes. Then Hilda gets new glasses. Free doctor. Lissel drinks Coca-Cola for 5 cents. Anya learns tractor from farmer who gives her pudding. And nobody punishes. Her words caught, but she didn't stop. "You tell us enemy is monster. But enemy give us chocolate. Enemy fix our eyes. Enemy let us cry." Her paper slipped from her hands, floating to the floor. "I do not understand this war anymore." The hall was silent. Hilda stood next, adjusting her glasses, the American ones. "I also do not want to go back," she said softly. Then Lissel rose, then Margrethe, then Elsa. One by one, 17 women stood, faces pale, eyes wet. Each had tasted something small and impossible. Kindness. Captain Lewis looked lost. His authority so firm minutes ago seemed suddenly fragile. He shuffled his papers, searching for protocol where none existed. "Ladies," he began carefully, "this isn't a simple matter. There are laws. Immigration procedures." His tone faltered. "Germany needs you. Your country needs rebuilding." "My country built camps," Lissel said quietly. "It built ovens. It sent my brother to die for land we didn't need." The words hit like a slap. No one moved. Mrs. Tate wiped her eyes with her apron and walked down the aisle. Her shoes clicked against the floor. When she reached Dorothea, she didn't speak. She just opened her arms. Dorothea fell into them like a child. "Baby," Mrs. Tate murmured. "You've been crying over tuna casserole for 8 months. That's just Campbell's soup and chips. Ain't nothing special." Dorothea sobbed harder. "If you're staying, I'm teaching you cornbread." The tension cracked. Someone laughed through tears. Captain Lewis cleared his throat, blinking hard. "Those returning to Germany will depart as scheduled," he said finally. "Those requesting delayed repatriation, report to processing tomorrow. I can't promise what'll happen, but I'll file the paperwork." The women nodded. It wasn't certainty they were choosing. It was possibility. Mrs. Tate brushed Dorothea's hair from her face. "You'll be all right, sugar. World's big enough for second chances." Outside, the sun poured through the windows, harsh and blinding. For the first time in years, Dorothea didn't flinch from the light. She let it touch her. The morning after the assembly felt strangely quiet. No drills, no roll call urgency, no distant echo of orders. The women who had chosen to stay, 17 of them, moved through the camp like ghosts unsure of their own permission to exist. The others packed trunks and folded uniforms with mechanical precision, eyes fixed somewhere far away as if already crossing the Atlantic. The sound of suitcase latches snapped through the air like punctuation. Dorothea stood by the window of the barracks, watching a line of departing women march toward the trucks. They looked like shadows walking backward into history. Hilda sat on her bunk, polishing her glasses, the habit that always calmed her. "They will go home to nothing," she said softly. Dorothea nodded. "And we will stay with nothing," she replied. The difference didn't feel real yet. Outside, Mrs. Tate's voice drifted from the kitchen, humming something low and familiar as she prepared breakfast. The smell of biscuits and coffee filled the air, grounding the women in a reality that still didn't make sense. America, they realized, had the luxury of normal days. Even its mornings carried an ease they'd forgotten existed. At breakfast, the room was half empty. Metal trays clattered softly. The women who remained ate slowly, as if each bite might be their last before someone changed their mind. Mrs. Tate ladled out oatmeal, added a drizzle of syrup, and smiled at each of them in turn. "Y'all look like somebody died," she said gently. Dorothea managed a faint laugh. "Maybe someone did. The person I was before." Mrs. Tate blinked, then reached over to squeeze her shoulder. Then it's a good funeral, baby. You let the old one rest. The women didn't know whether to cry or smile, so they did both. Letters arrived that afternoon. Thin envelopes stamped with censor marks. Some women tore them open instantly, desperate for fragments of home. Others left them untouched, afraid of what the words might take away. Dorothea's letter came from Hamburg. The handwriting was shaky. Her mother wrote of ration lines, of rebuilding the apartment with scavenged bricks, of missing her daughter but understanding if she never returned. We are proud, the letter ended, even if you are far away. Dorothea folded it carefully, pressed it against her chest. For the first time, pride didn't feel like obedience. It felt like permission to begin again. Liselle spent her afternoons by the fence sketching the baseball field with a dull pencil. She said the floodlights fascinated her, symbols of waste and mercy. They used these to burn our cities, she murmured once. Now they use them to play. Dorothea joined her sometimes, listening to the laughter drifting from the field. The American soldiers waved occasionally, easy and unguarded. It wasn't friendship yet, but it was something close, the beginning of an understanding that didn't need words. The women still called themselves prisoners, but in truth, the fence was becoming less of a barrier and more of a frame. Work resumed the next week. Some were assigned to the laundry, others to the farm or the hospital. Hilda worked with Captain Oshiro again, filing medical reports and assisting with minor procedures. She said he treated her like a colleague now, not a former enemy. He even asked me to help translate a letter for a Japanese patient, she said, eyes bright. He said my handwriting was better. The others laughed, but they saw what it meant, a small equality born not from surrender, but from simple human trust. Dorothea found herself cooking alongside Mrs. Tate, learning to stir, taste, season, and not ration everything. The camp felt different by June. The guards loosened. The laughter came easier, the air less heavy. When the trucks came for another repatriation round, no one cried this time. Those staying behind waved from the mess hall porch, holding cups of coffee like anchors. The departing women shouted farewells in half English, half German, their voices carrying over the Mississippi humidity. Dorothea watched until the dust settled. Do you regret? Hilda asked. No, she said quietly. For once I don't. Her words surprised her, but they felt true. Maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was wherever someone handed you kindness without reason. That night, Mrs. Tate brought a radio into the mess hall. The women gathered around as static gave way to music. Hank Williams again, soft and mournful. The melody rolled through the air like a prayer. Dorothea leaned her head against the wall, eyes closed. Across the room, Anya clutched Wyatt's belt buckle, polished silver catching the light. Hilda adjusted her glasses and smiled. Liselle tapped her pencil against the table in rhythm. They were still prisoners on paper, still bound by rules and fences, but inside the mess hall, surrounded by food, warmth, and song, they felt almost free. By July, Camp Clinton had stopped feeling like a prison. The fences were still there. The guard towers still cast long shadows, but the fear had evaporated. The American flag still fluttered above the gate, yet it no longer felt like a threat. The women moved through their days with the rhythm of routine. Work, meals, laughter, the occasional letter that smelled faintly of ash and home. Freedom hadn't come with trumpets or fanfare. It had come quietly, disguised as predictability, as the right to wake each morning knowing what the day would bring, and that it wouldn't hurt. Dorothea worked in the kitchen full-time now. Mrs. Tate said she had the makings of a proper Southern cook. She laughed the first time Dorothea tried to season gravy by measuring each grain of salt like it was gold. You don't ration love sugar, Mrs. Tate said, guiding her hand over the pot. Same goes for food. By the end of the week, Dorothea could make cornbread that didn't crumble, biscuits that rose high and proud. That's it, Mrs. Tate told her. Now you're feeding hearts, not just stomachs. The words stayed with Dorothea longer than any sermon ever had. Hilda found her place at the infirmary. She filed reports, organized supplies, and shadowed Captain Oshiro during medical rounds. He taught her to use the new sterilization equipment, explaining that clean tools save more lives than courage ever did. Hilda admired his precision, how he spoke softly but never without purpose. Sometimes, when the day was long, they'd share coffee and stories. He told her about his family in California, how they'd been relocated during the war, how healing others felt like reclaiming something. Hilda never said it aloud, but she understood. They were both learning to forgive by working. Anya spent her afternoons on the farm. Wyatt came less often now, but his lessons lingered in her hands. How to steady the clutch, how to listen to the machine like it was breathing. When she drove, the world made sense again. She wore his rodeo belt buckle beneath her uniform, hidden but always there. Some of the guards knew about it, but none said a word. Even in silence, compassion had a way of spreading. The young MP, who'd once looked away during that forbidden kiss, now offered her water on hot days, pretending not to notice when she whispered thanks. Liesel had become the camp's unofficial translator. Her English improved so quickly that even the officers relied on her. She helped new arrivals understand paperwork, wrote letters for those who couldn't, explained ration stamps and payrolls. "You'd make a fine secretary," one American clerk said. Liesel smiled faintly. "I used to organize bomb shipments," she replied, and the man went pale. But she wasn't cruel, she just told the truth. Every translated word felt like an act of balance, carrying the weight of two worlds without letting either one tip into bitterness. She'd stopped hating the language. It no longer belonged to the enemy. Evenings were their favorite. The mess hall turned into a place of stories and songs. Mrs. Tate would read Bible verses in her syrup-thick accent, then let the women take turns sharing poems or jokes. Sometimes they played music on the radio until the guards complained the volume carried past the fence. No one cared. Dorothea loved those nights. The flicker of lanterns, the smell of cornbread cooling on trays, the sound of German laughter mixing with American hymns. Somewhere between the two languages, between guilt and gratitude, they were becoming something new. Not redeemed, but alive again. One night, Dorothea asked Mrs. Tate why she kept cooking for prisoners when she could have been working anywhere else. The woman chuckled, leaning against the counter. "My husband used to say, 'Feed the body and the soul will follow.'" She wiped her hands on her apron. "Besides, sugar, the world's hungry for too much more than just food." Dorothea thought about that long after she went to bed. In Germany, nourishment had always been a transaction. Rations, quotas, punishments. In America, it was given freely, even to those who didn't deserve it. Maybe that was the difference that won the war. By midsummer, rumors spread that the camp would close before Christmas. The women whispered about jobs, sponsors, and new lives beyond the wire. Some spoke of staying in Mississippi, others of nursing schools in the North, or of following the men they'd met through labor details. No one mentioned Germany anymore. Not with anger, not with longing. When the lights went out at night, Dorothea lay awake listening to the cicadas, to Hilda's soft breathing, to the hum of floodlights in the distance. Once, those lights meant destruction. Now they meant baseball games. She smiled into the dark, unafraid. The first time the truck gate opened for civilian work duty, Dorothea felt her throat close. She had watched that gate for months, always from inside. Always as a boundary between her and a world that wasn't hers anymore. Now it yawned open like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. The guard, same young MP who once served her casserole, checked the roster, nodded, and waved her through. 6 women climbed into the back of the truck, each carrying small canvas bags and larger questions they didn't know how to ask. The fence clanged shut behind them, and the sound echoed like a heartbeat. The drive into Jackson was silent. No one dared speak, afraid their voices might shatter the fragile permission they'd been given. The landscape rolled by in shades of green they hadn't known existed. Real farms, real homes, real people moving through ordinary life. When the truck stopped outside a local church, Dorothea hesitated. The sign read St. Mark's Food Relief Depot. Inside, volunteers bustled between tables stacked with canned goods and flour sacks. The pastor, a round man with kind eyes, greeted them without a trace of hesitation. "You're our helpers today," he said. "Plenty of work to go around." For the next 4 hours, Dorothea packed boxes, labeled tins, and learned the rhythm of American charity. No one shouted. No one watched her like a criminal. A young woman about her age handed her a slice of cornbread during the break. "You folks from that camp out yonder? she asked casually. Dorothea froze. Yes, she said carefully. The woman nodded. My brother's over there too. He says you're all decent workers, harder than some locals. She laughed softly. Dorothea didn't know how to respond, so she just smiled. For the first time, being a POW didn't sound like an accusation. When the shift ended, the pastor handed each of them a paper bag with leftovers, biscuits, apples, a jar of jam. Can't have y'all going hungry, he said. It was such a simple kindness it hurt. On the drive back, no one spoke for miles. Then Hilda, sitting beside Dorothea, whispered, They thanked us. Her voice cracked. For helping. The others nodded slowly, processing the strangeness of gratitude directed toward people who had once been the enemy. By the time they saw the fence again, it looked different, not like captivity, but like shelter. Something inside them had changed shape. Over the next weeks, civilian assignments became routine. Some worked at farms, others at sewing cooperatives or kitchens. Anya spent her days at Wyatt's family farm, though no one said it aloud. Hilda was sent to a hospital in Jackson, where Captain Oshiro helped her secure a nursing assistant certificate. Liesel translated at a textile mill, helping new laborers learn safety procedures. Each woman moved through America with a kind of quiet reverence, careful not to stare too long at store windows, at jukeboxes, at the neon signs that hummed like captured stars. Freedom was overwhelming. It glittered, almost painfully bright. One Saturday, Dorothea was assigned to clean a schoolhouse. She stood in front of the chalkboard, erasing arithmetic written by unseen children, and thought about all the lessons she'd memorized as truth. Duty, loyalty, superiority. Every line felt wrong now. Outside, children's laughter drifted from the playground. They ran barefoot, their joy uncontained. One little girl, no older than 7, peeked through the doorway. You're the German lady, she said. Dorothea's breath caught. The girl held out a folded paper flower. Mama said you might like this. Dorothea knelt to take it, heart pounding. Thank you, she whispered, voice shaking. That night, back in the barracks, she placed the paper flower on her bunk beside Wyatt's belt buckle and Hilda's extra pair of glasses. The 3 objects looked ordinary, but together they felt sacred, evidence that kindness could survive even war. Liesel teased her gently, calling it a museum of miracles. Dorothea smiled. Maybe, she said. But I want to remember what it felt like to be forgiven. Outside, cicadas buzzed, the floodlights hummed, and somewhere beyond the fence a radio played Hank Williams. His voice bled through the night, low and mournful. I've never seen a night so long when time goes crawling by. The war had ended a year ago, but for these women, peace was only just beginning. It didn't come with victory parades or speeches. It came with paper flowers, with biscuits and laughter, with the smell of diesel and summer grass. It came from strangers who didn't ask for apologies before offering grace. As the camp lights flickered against the dark, Dorothea closed her eyes and let the sound of America fill her. The engines, the music, the unashamed abundance. Somewhere deep inside, she began to believe that the world could start again, even for those who had lost everything. By late summer, the camp had lost its edges. The fences still stood, but the idea of being contained no longer carried weight. The women moved freely between work sites, escorted more by habit than by guards. Mississippi's heat pressed down like a living thing, making the air shimmer. Cicadas filled the afternoons, their endless hum blending with distant tractor engines. Sometimes the women forgot which side of the fence they were on. America had a way of softening boundaries, not with mercy, but with routine. It didn't demand surrender. It demanded participation. And participation, they were learning, was its own kind of freedom. Dorothea's hands no longer shook when she cooked. She measured ingredients by feel now, not fear. Mrs. Tate often watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a proud smile tugging at her lips. See, baby? Told you you'd get it. The kitchen had become a sanctuary, a place of order and warmth. Dorothea had memorized the sound of the oven door, the creak of the floorboards, the laughter of women trading recipes across languages. Once she would have flinched at an American voice behind her. Now she turned to answer it. The enemy no longer had a face. It had a heartbeat. Hilda's world expanded too. At the Jackson Hospital, she'd become indispensable, organizing charts, mixing medicines, and translating for foreign patients. Captain Oshiro called her the sharpest set of eyes in Mississippi. Once the compliment would have embarrassed her. Now, it made her stand taller. Some nights, when the wards grew quiet, Oshiro would ask about her dreams. "You'll be a nurse again," he said one evening. "Here, if you want." Hilda stared at him. "Here?" The word sounded foreign in her mouth. "You mean America?" He met her gaze. "Why not?" For the first time, the idea didn't seem impossible. It felt like invitation. Anja's life unfolded between rows of cotton and the hum of Wyatt's old radio. Their connection had grown quiet but steady, like roots under soil. He never called her prisoner anymore, just Annie, as if that name could rewrite her past. One afternoon, they sat on the tailgate of his truck, watching the sun sink behind the fields. Wyatt handed her a folded photograph, his mother, his dog, and a small white house. "Ain't much," he said, "but it's home." Anya traced the image with her finger. "It's everything," she whispered. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Some truths didn't need translation. Liselle spent her evenings teaching English to the new arrivals, women still raw from transport, their accents sharp with suspicion. "Start with small words," she'd say. "Bread, water, thanks." She wrote the words on the chalkboard, her handwriting neat, controlled. When you learn how to say thank you, you start seeing the world differently. Some of them laughed, others rolled their eyes. But she kept at it. The language that once represented domination had become a bridge. She didn't teach perfect grammar. She taught survival through grace. "You can't hate someone when you understand the way they ask for bread," she'd say. Even the guards began to change. The young MP, Harris, who'd once looked nervous carrying a rifle, now played harmonica on quiet nights. The sound drifted across the camp, soft and uncertain, like peace itself learning to walk. Sometimes the women would hum along from their barracks. Harris pretended not to notice, but he always played longer on those nights. When Dorothea asked Mrs. Tate what she thought of it, the older woman smiled. "Sounds like folks learning how to forgive," she said. "Takes time, but time's what we got plenty of." It was the kind of wisdom that didn't need explaining, only living. Letters from Germany continued to arrive, but fewer now. The ones that came spoke of hunger, black markets, disappearances. The women read them with quiet grief. None of them spoke the thought aloud, but it lived behind every silence. We were supposed to be the lucky ones. Dorothea kept her mother's letters under her pillow, unread for weeks at a time. Each word felt heavier now, not because it condemned her, but because it asked her to choose. Go home to ruins or stay in the land that fed her casseroles and second chances. Every night the choice felt both easier and harder. When autumn came, the air turned gold. Leaves drifted over the barracks roof, soft and brittle. The women began to plan for what came next, real plans, not fantasies. Hilda applied for a medical internship in New Jersey. Liesel wrote to a factory in Ohio that offered foreign apprenticeships. Anya talked about buying her own tractor someday, though no one knew whether she was joking. Dorothea said little, but Mrs. Tate could read her thoughts like recipes. "You ain't gotta decide today," she told her one morning. "Sometimes the heart takes longer to pack than the suitcase." Dorothea nodded, grateful and terrified. October brought the smell of burning leaves and paperwork. The War Department had started reviewing delayed repatriation requests, and Camp Clinton was suddenly filled with rumors. Lists appeared on the bulletin board outside the mess hall, names typed in neat, unforgiving lines. Some had red stamps beside them, approved for civilian transfer. Others, a cold, pending repatriation. Every morning the women gathered around those lists like pilgrims at a shrine. No one celebrated. Even good news felt fragile, like a candle too close to wind. Freedom had become something they no longer trusted to last. Dorothea's name wasn't on the list. Not yet. Hilda's was. The notice said, "Medical Placement, Newark, NJ." She folded it carefully, as if the paper itself might tear under the weight of meaning. "Newark," she whispered, testing the foreign sound. "It's near the sea." Dorothea smiled, though her chest ached. You'll see the ocean again? Hilda nodded, but tears filled her eyes. Not the same one. They sat together that night, silent, listening to the radio hum through static. Outside, the floodlights buzzed softly. They used to mean imprisonment. Now they just meant time passing, another night closer to goodbye. Anja received her letter 2 days later. Her application for agricultural labor had been approved under sponsorship from Wyatt Landrino's family farm. She read it 3 times, barely breathing. He did this, she said finally, voice trembling. He found a way. The other women hugged her, half in joy, half in disbelief. You'll have to work hard, Liesel teased, and no more stealing his pudding. Anja laughed through her tears. Maybe I'll make my own. The next morning, Wyatt arrived at the gate with official forms and a basket of biscuits. He tipped his hat to the guards, then to Anja. Told you I'd wait. Liesel's name appeared under industrial placement. An Ohio textile factory had offered her an apprenticeship. It's not glamorous, she told the others, but it's work. She tried to sound calm, but her voice betrayed her excitement. They even pay real wages. Dorothea grinned. You'll be running it within a year. Liesel shrugged. Maybe. She packed neatly, folding everything into perfect squares: discipline, order, control. After so much chaos, control was a kind of salvation. She tucked her pencil sketches of the floodlights between her clothes. To remind me, she said, of how strange peace looked the first time I saw it. Every departure left a hollow behind. The barracks grew quieter, the echoes longer. Beds stripped bare looked like scars. Mrs. Tate tried to fill the silence, with noise, baking more biscuits, turning up the radio, humming louder. I'm gonna miss that crowd, she admitted one night. You girls brought life back to this kitchen. Dorothea looked up from the dough she was kneading. You gave it to us first. Mrs. Tate smiled sadly. Maybe so. Guess that's how it's supposed to work. She reached across the counter and squeezed Dorothea's flour-dusted hand. Don't you dare forget what you learned here. When Hilda left, the entire camp turned out to see her off. Captain Oshiro shook her hand like a colleague, not a prisoner. You'll do good work, he said simply. She wanted to thank him, to tell him what it meant that he'd given her back her sight and her faith in decency. But no words felt big enough. Instead, she just said, I'll keep my tools clean. He smiled, understanding everything she didn't say. The truck door shut. As it rolled away, Dorothea caught a final glimpse of Hilda's face through the window, blurred by glass and tears, but smiling still. Anja left next. Wyatt stood beside the truck, holding his hat like a prayer. She wore her work uniform, sleeves rolled, a small suitcase at her feet. You sure about this? He asked quietly. They say it's paperwork, but it's more like forever. Anja touched his hand. Forever's shorter than what I already survived. He swallowed hard. I'll keep the radio on, he said. Same song, same station. Then I'll find it, she promised. When the truck started, he walked beside it until it turned the corner. The air smelled like cut hay and endings. Neither of them looked back. By the end of the month, half the women were gone. Dorothea remained, her name still missing from every list. At night, she sat on the barracks steps, watching the empty rows where laughter used to live. Mrs. Tate joined her, bringing 2 mugs of coffee. Still waiting, huh? She asked. Dorothea nodded. Maybe they forgot me. Nah, Mrs. Tate said softly. World just ain't ready to let you go yet. They watched the horizon until the floodlights clicked on. The same lights that once terrified her now looked almost kind. Somewhere beyond them, ships were sailing east. She stayed still. Hilda once worked. Every building held echoes of transformation, invisible and permanent. By the time she reached the baseball field, the grass was high, the bases gone. Only the floodlights remained, tall and silent, waiting for someone to turn them on again. That night she borrowed the key from the guard shack. No one stopped her. The camp was beyond rules now. She walked to the field, boots sinking into wet ground, and climbed the small platform that held the floodlight switch. For a long moment, she just stood there, rain soaking through her coat. Then she flipped the lever. One by one, the lights roared to life, white beams cutting through the darkness, illuminating the empty field like a ghost of summer. The hum filled the air, steady and electric. Dorothea stood in the glow, blinking against the brightness, feeling something break and mend all at once. She thought of Hamburg, the magnesium flares falling like false stars, the sky burning white before the bombs. And now this, the same light, no longer for destruction but for remembrance. She whispered to the air, half prayer, half promise. They gave us the lights we feared, she said, and they used them for games. Her breath steamed in the cold. Maybe that's what peace means, to waste light on joy. The field was empty, but she imagined the laughter, the thud of a baseball, the cheers carried by warm Mississippi wind. For the first time, the memory didn't hurt. It healed. When she returned to the barracks, dawn was already November arrived with rain that wouldn't stop. The fields turned to mud, the air thick with the scent of wet cotton and iron. Camp Clinton was nearly empty now. Only a handful of women remained, Dorothea among them, walking through quiet corridors that once echoed with dozens of voices. The guard spoke softly as if afraid to disturb ghosts. Every few days another truck came, taking one or two more away. The sound of its engine had become the rhythm of departure. Dorothea stood at the fence most evenings, watching the taillights vanish down the road like fireflies fleeing the dark. Inside, the barracks smelled of soap and rain. Dorothea sat on her bunk with the paper flower still pinned beside her pillow. It had faded, edges curled from humidity, but she couldn't throw it away. It reminded her of the girl at the schoolhouse, of small hands offering forgiveness without understanding. She reached beneath her mattress and pulled out the letter she'd written weeks ago but never sent. It began with "Dear Mama," and ended with "I'm not coming back yet." She read it again, lips moving soundlessly. The words still frightened her, but they no longer felt like betrayal. Mrs. Tate visited less often now, the kitchen mostly closed, its shelves nearly bare. When she did come, she brought leftovers wrapped in wax paper and stories about the world outside. "They say the war trials are on the radio," she told Dorothea one afternoon. "Whole world listening to people answer for things can't be answered." Dorothea nodded, eyes lowered. "Do you think forgiveness can be judged?" Mrs. Tate paused, thinking. "Forgiveness ain't something you earn, sugar. It's something someone gives you 'cause they got more heart than hate." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's why y'all still here. Learning that lesson takes time." Winter came early. Frost crept across the windows, turning the barracks into a glittering cage of ice. The last few women huddled around a stove, trading memories like warmth. Liesel wrote from Ohio, describing machines louder than thunder and co-workers who called her Lee because they couldn't pronounce her name. Hilda's letter came on hospital stationery. "I am learning to live without apology." Anya's was shorter, just a photograph of a sunrise over a field, Wyatt's shadow beside hers. Dorothea read each letter twice, then tucked them away carefully. Tiny proofs that the impossible had happened, that life had continued, even after ruin. The order came quietly one morning, Camp Clinton to be decommissioned within 30 days. The remaining prisoners would be processed for release or transfer. No speeches, no ceremony, just a date and a signature. Dorothea felt the paper's weight like a final heartbeat. She walked the grounds that afternoon, tracing every path she'd memorized over months. The mess hall, the laundry, the empty infirmary where hunting the sky pale gold. The trucks would come soon, but she no longer cared where they took her. She sat on her bunk, hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, and watched the light spill through the cracks in the walls. Somewhere far away, America was waking up, its radios, its diners, its ordinary miracles. Dorothea smiled softly. For 3 years she had survived war. For 8 months she had learned peace. And now, as the floodlights dimmed for the last time, she realized she was ready to begin. The morning of departure arrived quietly. A thin mist drifted through the camp, blurring edges of fences and watchtowers until everything looked half erased. Dorothea stood in line for roll call, coat buttoned to her chin, the paper flower pinned over her heart. Around her, the women spoke in hushed voices, some trembling with anticipation, others staring at the ground as if trying to memorize the dirt. A truck idled near the gate, its engine low and steady, waiting to carry them into whatever came next. The light was soft, forgiving, the kind that made even barbed wire look gentle. When her name was called, Dorothea stepped forward. No hesitation, no trembling. The young MP holding the clipboard looked barely 20. "You ready, ma'am?" he asked, his southern drawl turning ma'am into something tender. She nodded but didn't move toward the truck. Instead, she turned back to look at the camp one last time. The mess hall, the laundry lines, the muddy baseball field still glistening from last night's rain. It looked smaller now, like a place that had already begun fading into memory. "I am ready," she said finally, though she wasn't sure if it was true. In her pocket were 3 things: Hilda's letter about sight, Liesel's Coca-Cola cap polished to a dull silver, and the recipe Mrs. Tate had written in looping cursive: Campbell's soup, tuna, noodles, potato chips on top. Dorothea had folded it so many times the paper had gone soft. She touched it like a prayer. The recipe wasn't about food anymore. It was about a moment, the first time she'd understood that kindness could arrive from the hands she'd been taught to fear, that something as ordinary as lunch could unmake years of hatred. The thought still startled her like sunlight on broken glass. The truck rumbled to life and she climbed aboard. The road out of Camp Clinton wound between pine trees and cotton fields before disappearing into open sky. Dorothea leaned against the wooden slats, feeling the vibration through her bones. Beside her, another woman whispered, "Do you think they'll forget us?" Dorothea didn't answer right away. The wind tangled her hair, carrying the smell of rain and distant magnolias. "No," she said finally. "I think they already remember us differently." The woman frowned. "How?" Dorothea smiled faintly. "As people, not enemies." The words felt foreign and right all at once. When they stopped for lunch at a roadside station, the American driver handed out sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Inside was ham, real butter, and lettuce so crisp it snapped when she bit into it. No one spoke. They just ate quietly, reverently, as if tasting civilization itself. Dorothea chewed slowly, remembering the first meal that had made her cry, the way her hands had shaken over a simple tray of tuna casserole. This time she didn't cry. The taste still carried weight, but it no longer hurt. It felt like memory instead of miracle, a bridge she could finally walk across without breaking. Hours later, the truck crossed a small bridge over muddy water. Dorothea looked down at the reflection of the sky, the pale light scattered by ripples. For a moment she saw herself, thin, tired, but alive, and thought of something Captain Oshiro had said to Hilda. Funny thing about eyes, they work the same in everyone. Maybe hearts did too. Maybe that was the real truth she had learned here. That compassion wasn't weakness, that abundance wasn't arrogance. It was simply what peace looked like when no one was trying to win anymore. The realization left her quiet, humbled and strangely calm. By evening, they reached the train station. Dozens of women stood waiting on the platform, suitcases at their feet, eyes turned toward the horizon. Some had sponsors in America, others tickets back to Europe. The air was full of steam and farewells. Mrs. Tate appeared from nowhere, apron still dusted with flour, holding a tin wrapped in a towel. "For the ride," she said, pressing it into Dorothea's hands. Inside was cornbread, warm, sweet, crumbling at the edges. Dorothea didn't try to speak. Her throat was already closing. Mrs. Tate smiled gently. "You'll do fine, baby. Just don't forget what Tuesday tastes like." As the train whistle blew, Dorothea climbed aboard and found a seat by the window. The platform began to slide away, Mrs. Tate's figure shrinking into the distance. She pressed her palm against the glass, watching until the camp, the fields, and even the lights vanished behind the trees. The rhythm of the train carried her forward, steady and certain. She reached into the tin, broke off a piece of cornbread, and took a bite. Sweet, soft, ordinary. She closed her eyes and let it melt on her tongue, a quiet echo of everything she'd learned. That peace could taste simple, and that was enough. Learned how to feed one another. The train cut through the night like a glowing thread stitched across the darkness. Dorothea leaned her head against the cold window, watching fields blur into shadows. Every mile pulled her further from the camp, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that some part of her still sat under those floodlights, watching them hum against the Mississippi sky. Sleep came in fragments. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Mrs. Tate's face, the Coca-Cola fizzing, the light glinting off Hilda's glasses. It wasn't the war that haunted her now, it was the kindness. That was harder to survive. At dawn, the conductor walked through the car tipping his cap. Next stop, New Orleans. The name sounded like something from a song. Dorothea straightened her coat, folded the cornbread tin shut, and looked at her reflection in the window. For years, she'd seen only the soldier, the believer in propaganda, the girl who'd saluted and starved and called it duty. Now she saw someone else, softer, bruised but awake. The woman staring back was no longer fighting for an idea. She was learning how to live. And that, she realized, was the hardest kind of courage. When the train hissed to a stop, the platform was already alive with sound. Engines, shouts, gulls wheeling over the harbor. Lines of passengers shuffled toward the waiting ships. Some were bound for Europe. Others stayed, chasing new beginnings. Dorothea hesitated at the top of the ramp. Her heart hammered in her chest. She could go back to Germany, to rubble, ration cards, and ghosts. Or she could step into the unknown, a land that had taught her mercy through casseroles and cornbread. For a moment, both choices felt like exile. Then she took a breath and followed the light. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Camp Clinton addressed to Mrs. Geneva Tate. The handwriting was careful, foreign, each curve deliberate. Inside was a single page. Dear Mrs. Tate, it began. I am in Ohio now. I work in a kitchen that smells like your mess hall. I cook your recipe. I serve people who do not know my name. Sometimes I tell them it is tuna casserole, and they laugh because they think it is ordinary. But for me, it is not ordinary. It is the first meal of peace I ever tasted. Thank you, Dorothea. Mrs. Tate read it twice, then folded it neatly and slid it into her apron pocket. You see, she murmured to the other cooks. Sometimes kindness sticks longer than hate. She smiled, shaking her head. Lord knows that girl cried over more casseroles than anyone I ever met. Then she went back to stirring her pot, humming a tune from the radio, never realizing that a woman thousands of miles away would remember her name for the rest of her life. Ordinary Tuesday lunch, extraordinary consequence. That's how history changes quietly without anyone noticing. Years passed. Dorothea never returned to Germany. She worked in diners, canneries, and eventually a hospital kitchen, where the smell of coffee and starch brought back Mississippi mornings. People called her Dora now. She never corrected them. Every Tuesday she made tuna casserole. Campbell's soup, noodles, crushed potato chips, the same recipe, the same rhythm. And every time she took it out of the oven, she smiled softly. Some people leave monuments. She left a meal. A symbol of the day she learned that mercy doesn't need to be grand, it just needs to exist. History remembers wars for their battles, their numbers, their firestorms. But maybe it should remember this too. A Tuesday lunch in a prisoner camp. A woman who wept because kindness felt like betrayal, and another woman who couldn't understand why casserole could break someone's heart. Empires fall. Nations rebuild. Yet what lasts are these small collisions of humanity. The moments when enemies eat the same food and discover they are simply people, hungry and alive. Maybe that's the real victory no one writes down, the quiet surrender to understanding. So when you hear the word peace, don't picture treaties or parades. Picture a woman with shaking hands tasting something she thought she didn't deserve. Picture a cook offering seconds without judgment. Picture a light once used for bombs now shining over a baseball field. Peace is not silence, it's the sound of laughter where there used to be sirens. It's wasteful, abundant, undeserved, and that's why it matters. Because peace in the end isn't an idea, it's a meal shared between enemies who finally left.